Snow was falling, but it felt like ashes. Each flake vanished on the wind, a ghost of a fire long since dead. On the edge of town, a girl named Eliza Whitmore walked alone. She was 21, but her face was old with a hunger that gnawed deeper than bone. Her hair was the color of the snow itself, a shocking, unnatural white that made folks whisper. They called her cursed. They weren't wrong, but they had no idea what the curse really was, and neither did she. Her only thought was shelter. A barn at the end of the street glowed with a faint light, a single steady heartbeat in the storm. She'd heard the stories. A giant lived there, an Apache outcast named Takakota Greyhawk. A man some said had killed with his bare hands. Others said he wasn't a man at all. But hunger is a funny thing. It makes you brave. It makes you stupid. Eliza knocked. The sound died in the wind. She knocked again, harder this time, her knuckles cracking against the frozen wood. The door didn't creak. It swung open with a sudden, silent weight, and he was there. Taller than the stories, wider than a doorway. He was shirtless beneath a rough coat thrown open, firelight catching the hard lines of his chest. A scar sliced across his jaw like a frozen river, and his eyes. His eyes were as dark and old as the earth. He didn't speak. He just looked at her torn boots, her chapped lips, and her snow-white hair. Eliza thought he was sizing her up, deciding if she was worth the trouble. She wasn't wrong. But he wasn't looking at her hunger or her torn clothes. He was looking at her hair. And in the depths of those dark eyes, something flickered. Not pity, not anger, recognition. Can I clean your barn for one night's sleep? Her voice was a frayed thread, barely audible over the storm. His gaze dropped from her hair to her eyes, and the flicker was gone, replaced by a wall of stone. He studied her, weighing her words against the crushing silence. Shame rose in Eliza's throat, hot and sharp. She clutched her thin shawl, the last piece of a life she barely remembered. "I'll earn it," she said, her voice finding a sliver of strength. "I'll work till my hands bleed. Just one night." Still nothing. The fire behind him cast his shadow long and menacing across the snow. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, the kind of cold that doesn't just chill you, it empties you. She was about to turn, to let the storm take her, when he did something she didn't expect. He stepped aside. No word, no nod, just an opening, a space in the world that wasn't actively trying to kill her. It was the greatest mercy she'd known in a year. She scurried past him, her head bowed, and the heavy door thudded shut behind her. The sound was so final. It cut off the wind, the snow, the whispers of the town. For a moment, there was only the smell of hay and horse, and the impossible warmth radiating from a stone hearth. He moved past her without a sound, his boots silent on the packed earth floor. He was a predator at rest, every movement economical and deliberate. She watched him pour feed for the horses, his back a wall of muscle. She knew she had to earn her keep. Her hands found a pitchfork, and she started working, clearing soiled straw from a stall. The wood was rough, and her already raw skin protested, but she ignored the pain. Every scoop of the fork was a payment. Every drop of sweat was a thank you. She could feel his eyes on her sometimes. It wasn't a threatening gaze, just watchful. She didn't dare look up. She just worked until her arms trembled and her vision swam. When she finally paused, leaning against the stall, she saw it. On a wooden ledge sat a clay bowl. Steam curled from it, carrying the scent of venison and herbs. Her stomach clenched into a painful knot. Hunger and pride went to war inside her, and hunger was winning. She turned, and he was there, arms crossed, his expression a mask. "You left it," she whispered. He didn't answer. He just inclined his head, a gesture so slight she almost missed it. That single, silent movement broke something inside her. She sank to the floor, her knees buckling. She lifted the bowl, the heat a miracle against her frozen fingers. The first bite was so hot it burned her tongue, but she didn't care. Tears welled in her eyes, not from the pain, but from the shock of a kindness she hadn't known existed. It was a kindness hidden in silence, which made it feel truer than any pretty word. Later, utterly spent, she found a quilt laid out in a clean corner of the hayloft. She knew, somehow, he had put it there for her. She curled up beneath it, pulling the rough wool to her chin. It smelled of wood smoke and leather and something else. Something like the mountains after a rain. For the first time in months, she felt a warmth that reached all the way to her bones. Down below, Takakota Greyhawk watched her from the shadows. The girl with hair like a winter storm slept the sleep of the dead. He should have sent her away. He should have barred the door and let the whispers of the town remain just whispers. But he couldn't, because he had seen her hair, and he knew it wasn't a curse, it was a sign, a marker he had been waiting for his entire life. He had given her shelter from the storm outside, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than any blizzard, that he had just invited a much deadlier storm right into his home. The morning came quiet and gray. Eliza woke up feeling a strange peace. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. She forgot the begging, the shame, the gnawing hunger. She was just warm. Then she heard the soft shifting of horses below, and it all came rushing back. She looked down from the hayloft. Takakota was there, brushing down a large black mare. The pale morning light streamed through the gaps in the barn walls, striping his broad back. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was mesmerizing. He hadn't woken her. He had let her sleep. The thought sent a fresh wave of shame washing over her. She was a burden, a stray he'd taken in. She scrambled down, smoothing her ragged dress, and immediately looked for work. She grabbed a bucket to fetch water, needing to prove her worth, to pay back the debt of the stew and the warm quilt. Each task she did, feeding the chickens, hauling water from the well, was a silent negotiation. "I am not a beggar," her aching muscles screamed. "I am earning this." He never spoke, but when her frozen fingers fumbled with a heavy sack of grain, his hand would appear, steadying it. When a pail of water sloshed, threatening to spill, he would be there to catch it. He didn't offer help with words. He just helped. It was unnerving. It was comforting. By midday, her stomach was growling again. She tried to ignore it, her face burning with embarrassment. She turned from her work, and there it was again, on the same ledge as the night before. A piece of dark bread, a thick slice of cheese, and a tin cup of steaming broth. He was across the barn, mending a leather bridle, his focus absolute. He acted as if the food had appeared by magic. This time, her pride didn't even put up a fight. She ate, slowly, savoring each bite. She looked over at his broad back, at the way the light caught the silver threads in his black hair. "Thank you," she whispered to the air. He didn't turn, but his hands paused their work for a single heartbeat before resuming their steady rhythm. The barn was a sanctuary, but the town was just beyond the door. When she went to the well that afternoon, the whispers followed her like a pack of dogs. "There she is," Martha Consincade sneered from the porch of the mercantile. "The white-haired witch, gone and thrown herself at that savage." The words were like stones, and they found their mark. Eliza kept her head down, her knuckles white on the bucket handle. She felt their eyes on her, stripping her down, judging her, condemning her. She didn't say a word. She had learned long ago that fighting back only made it worse. When she returned to the barn, her cheeks were on fire. Takakota looked up from his work. He saw the way she held her shoulders, tight and defensive. He saw the shame in her eyes. But he asked nothing. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him about the hateful words, the poison they dripped into the air. But how could she? He lived under that same cloud every single day. His silence was a shield he had built over years. What right did she have to complain about a single afternoon? Instead, she just kept working. But the words festered. Finally, she couldn't hold them in anymore. "They think I'm indecent," she murmured, her back to him, "for being here with you." The silence that followed was long and heavy. She expected him to tell her to leave, to rid himself of the trouble she'd brought. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "Their words are snow," he said. "They fall, and then they melt." The simple poetry of it stunned her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that words had no weight, that they could simply vanish. But the cruel words she'd carried her whole life hadn't melted. They had frozen solid, deep inside her soul. That night, she found the quilt in the loft again, but something was different. Tucked into its folds was a small, carved wooden bird. It was smooth and worn, as if held by nervous hands for many years. One of its wings was broken off. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew this bird. A memory, blurry and distant, flashed in her mind. A woman's hand pressing it into hers. A voice whispering, "Never forget who you are." Her mother. Down below, Takakota was banking the fire for the night. He glanced up toward the loft, and his gaze was different. It wasn't just watchful anymore. It was searching. Eliza clutched the bird, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a coincidence. The food, the quilt, the silent help. And now this piece of her past. He hadn't just given her shelter. He knew something about her. Something she didn't even know herself. The man of silence was keeping a secret. And Eliza had a terrifying feeling that the whispers of the town were nothing compared to the truth he was hiding. The storm outside had died, but a new one was brewing inside the walls of the barn, and Eliza was standing right in the eye of it. Days passed in a quiet rhythm. Work, eat, sleep. But the peace was gone. The small wooden bird was a constant, nagging question. She kept it hidden, but she felt its weight in her pocket every second. It was a key, but she had no idea what lock it was meant to open. She started watching him. Really watching him. She noticed things she hadn't before. The way his eyes would scan the horizon, as if he were looking for something. The strange, intricate patterns carved into the handles of his tools, patterns that seemed to echo the design on the wooden bird. The whispers in town grew louder, uglier. They were no longer just whispers. They were accusations. "He's keeping her like property," Silas Boone declared in the saloon, his voice loud enough for the whole town to hear. Silas was a rancher with mean eyes and a cruel smile, a man who fed on the fear of others. An outcast and his cursed pet. It ain't right. Eliza felt the tension coiling in the town like a snake. When she walked to the mercantile for supplies, using the few coins she'd had sewn into the hem of her dress, people would cross the street to avoid her. Martha Consincade refused to serve her, turning her back with a sniff of disgust. Eliza returned to the barn, empty-handed and burning with humiliation. She found Takakota sharpening a knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone filling the quiet space. "They won't even sell me flour," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "They look at me like I'm a disease." He didn't stop his work. "What did you expect?" "I don't know," she burst out. "Some decency? Some kindness?" "You will not find it in them," he said, his voice flat. He tested the blade against his thumb. "They fear what they do not understand. They fear me," she whispered, "because of my hair." He finally looked at her. His dark eyes seemed to see right through her skin, into the confused, frightened heart of her. "It is not your hair they fear," he said softly. "It is the memory of it." A chill went down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "What do you mean? What memory?" He looked away, his jaw tight. The wall of silence was back, stronger than ever. He had said too much. The conversation was over. But he had given her another piece of the puzzle, the memory of it. It wasn't just her. It was someone else, someone before her with the same snow-white hair. That night, the nightmares started. Flashes of fire, the smell of burning pine, a woman with white hair, her face contorted in pain, a man's arm with a swirling tattoo reaching for her, and a child, a little girl, hiding, watching through the cracks in a floorboard. She woke up gasping, her body drenched in sweat despite the cold. The carved bird was clutched in her hand. She sat up, her heart pounding. The dream had felt so real. She looked down from the loft. Takakota was not in his usual spot by the fire. He was gone. Panic seized her. Had he left her? Had the town finally driven him away? Then she saw it. The big barn door was slightly ajar. A thin sliver of moonlight cut across the floor. She crept down the ladder, her bare feet silent on the wood. She peered outside. He was standing at the edge of the woods, a silhouette against the snow-covered trees. He was not alone. Another man was with him, wrapped in a heavy winter cloak. She couldn't see the other man's face, but she could hear their voices, low and urgent. "Getting bolder," the stranger said. "Blackwood knows she's here." "Let him come," Takakota's voice rumbled. "He is not the man he was. He has more riders, more guns. You cannot protect her alone." "I will not fail again." The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. Fail again. The dream. The woman with white hair. It was all connected. Takakota wasn't just a stranger who had taken her in. He was a part of her past, a past she couldn't remember. She backed away from the door, her mind reeling. Blackwood. The name meant nothing to her, but the stranger had said it with fear. And Takakota. He was protecting her. From what? She scrambled back up to the loft, her heart a frantic drum. She had come to this barn seeking shelter from a storm, but she had stumbled into the heart of a war she didn't even know was being fought. The wooden bird felt heavy in her hand, no longer a keepsake, but a burden, a signpost pointing toward a terrifying, forgotten truth. Eliza didn't sleep again that night. The conversation she'd overheard played over and over in her mind. Blackwood knows she's here. I will not fail again. Who was Blackwood? And who had Takakota failed before? The next day, the air in the barn was thick with unspoken things. Takakota was even more silent than usual, his movements tight, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The barn no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a fortress waiting for a siege. Eliza knew she couldn't keep hiding in the dark. She needed answers. That afternoon, while he was tending to the horses, she approached him, her courage a flickering candle flame in the wind. She held out the small, broken-winged bird. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice steady. He stopped brushing the mare and turned to her. He looked at the bird in her palm, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a flicker of profound sadness in his eyes. "It was your mother's," he said. The words hung in the air between them. "My mother? You knew my mother?" "I did," he said, his voice low. "Her name was Anaba. She had hair like yours, the color of the winter moon. Anaba." The name echoed in the empty chambers of her memory. "What happened to her?" Eliza pressed, her voice trembling. "The town. They talk about a memory." Takakota's face became a mask of stone. "The past is a ghost. It is better left undisturbed. I have a right to know." Her voice rose, filled with a frustration that had been building for days. "My whole life, people have treated me like a curse. I want to know why. What did she do?" He turned away from her, his broad back a clear dismissal. But Eliza wouldn't let it go. She stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Tell me," she demanded. He looked down at her, and the raw grief in his eyes silenced her. "She trusted the wrong man," he said, his voice hoarse. "A man who promised her protection but only wanted what she had. Her gift. Gift? Eliza was confused. What gift? The same one you have, he said, his gaze intense. The whisper of the land, the ability to find water where there is none, to calm a storm, to feel the pulse of the earth. They called her a witch for it. They hated her, but they wanted her power. It sounded like madness, a child's fairy tale. But as he spoke, things started to click into place. The way she'd always felt an unnatural calm during storms, the uncanny knack she had for finding the ripest berries, the clearest springs. She had always dismissed it as luck. Who was the man? She whispered, dreading the answer. His name is Alistair Blackwood, Takakota said, and the name was a curse on his tongue. He owns most of the land in this valley, and he is never satisfied. He heard the legends of your family, of their connection to the land. He believed it would lead him to a lost silver mine. The nightmare flashed in her mind again. The fire, the man with the swirling tattoo on his arm. He's the one, she breathed. He killed her, didn't he? Takakota's jaw clenched. The scar stood out, a pale, angry line against his skin. I was sworn to protect her. I was her family's guardian. But I was young. I was reckless. Blackwood's men came in the night. There was a fire. His voice broke. I failed. I got this, he said, touching the scar on his jaw. And your mother. She was gone. Blackwood thought you had died in the fire with her. The truth was a torrent, washing away the foundations of her entire life. She wasn't cursed. She was hunted. Her parents hadn't abandoned her. They had died protecting her. And this silent, stoic man had spent years living with the guilt of his failure, waiting for a ghost to reappear. He knows I'm alive now, she said, the pieces fitting together with horrifying clarity. Silas Boone. He works for Blackwood. Takakota nodded. Boone has been watching the roads for years, looking for a girl with white hair. Your arrival was a spark on dry tinder. Now, Blackwood is coming. The fear was cold and sharp in her belly, but underneath it, something else was stirring. A hot, bright flame of anger. For the mother she never knew. For the life that was stolen from her. For the man who had carried this burden alone for so long. What do we do? She asked. Takakota picked up his knife again, but he wasn't sharpening it. He was just holding it, his knuckles white. This barn stands on sacred ground. The spirits of my ancestors are in these timbers. Here, we have a chance. Out there. He looked toward the door, toward the town that hated them and the wilderness that held their enemy. Out there, you are his prize. Suddenly, a horse whinnied nervously from the stalls. Then another. They began to stamp their feet, their eyes wide with panic. Takakota was instantly on alert, his head snapping up. They're here, he said, his voice a low growl. He moved to the door and peered through a small crack. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. She could hear them now, the crunch of boots on snow, the low murmur of men's voices, the metallic click of a rifle being cocked. The siege had begun. The barn was plunged into a tense silence, broken only by the nervous shifting of the horses. Outside, the voices grew clearer. We know you're in there, Greyhawk! It was Silas Boone's voice, dripping with smug confidence. And we know you've got the girl. Blackwood just wants to talk to her. Send her out, and this can all be peaceful. Takakota didn't answer. He moved with silent purpose, grabbing a heavy rifle from a hiding place beneath a stack of blankets. He checked the load, his movements fluid and practiced. Don't listen to him, Eliza whispered, her voice tight with fear. I am not, Takakota said, his eyes scanning the walls of the barn, noting every crack, every weak point. He lies as easily as he breathes. What are they going to do? They will try to wait us out. Then they will try to burn us out. The words were stark, devoid of any comfort. Hours crawled by. The sun began to set, painting the snow outside in shades of orange and purple. The men outside lit a fire, their shadows dancing like demons against the barn walls. They were laughing, drinking, confident in their numbers. Inside, the cold began to creep in. Takakota hadn't lit the hearth fire, not wanting to give them a target or fill the barn with smoke. He and Eliza sat in the growing darkness, the rifle resting across his lap. The fear was a living thing inside Eliza, coiling in her gut. But the more she thought about her mother, about the life stolen from her, the more her fear began to curdle into a hard, cold rage. They would not take her. She would not be a prize. "My gift," she said into the darkness. "You said I have it. How do I use it?" Takakota looked at her, his face barely visible in the gloom. "It is not a weapon you can wield like a knife. It is a part of you. It is instinct." Anaba could feel the vibrations of the earth, feel the roots of the trees, feel the water flowing deep underground. "How?" Eliza insisted. "Clear your mind," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Forget the men outside, forget the fear. Feel the barn around you, feel the wood, the stone. Feel the ground beneath your feet. It is alive. Listen to it." Eliza closed her eyes. It felt foolish. Her heart was pounding, and the jeers of the men outside were a constant distraction. Listen to the ground? It was insane. But she thought of her mother. She thought of Takakota's vigil. She owed it to them to try. She breathed deeply, forcing the tension from her shoulders. She focused on the feeling of the rough wooden floorboards beneath her. She tried to imagine the roots of the trees outside, pushing deep into the frozen earth. She tried to feel the weight of the snow on the roof. At first, there was nothing, just darkness and the sound of her own breathing. But then, something shifted. A faint hum. A low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. It was so faint, she thought she was imagining it. But it grew stronger. It was a pulse, a slow, deep heartbeat. She could feel the horse's anxiety as a nervous energy in the air. She could feel the cold indifference of the stones in the foundation. She could feel the slow, patient strength of the massive timbers that held up the roof. And she could feel the men outside. Their presence was a discordant, angry buzz against the steady hum of the land. "I feel it," she whispered, her eyes flying open. "It's everything. It's all connected." Takakota nodded slowly. Anaba said, "It was like listening to a song. You have heard it your whole life. You are just now realizing you are the singer." A sudden crash from outside shattered the moment. One of the men had thrown a heavy log against the door, testing its strength. The door shuddered, but held. "Getting impatient, Greyhawk!" Boone shouted, followed by drunken laughter. The discordant buzz of their anger intensified. Eliza could feel their malice like a physical touch, but she could feel something else, too. Something Takakota couldn't. Deep beneath the barn, running through the frozen earth, she could feel a trickle of water, an underground spring. It was small, but the pulse of it was clear and strong against the hum of the earth, and she felt an idea bloom in her mind. A desperate, crazy idea. "The ground," she said, her voice filled with a new urgency. "It's not completely frozen. There's water underneath us. A spring." Takakota looked at her, his eyes narrowed in the darkness. "What are you saying?" "You said they'll try to burn us out," she said, the plan forming as she spoke. "They've built their fire close to the front wall, the ground there. It's the weakest spot." He understood immediately. "You think you can? What? Make the ground give way?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But Anaba, could she do something like that?" "The legends say her ancestors could move mountains," he said, his voice laced with a strange mix of awe and fear. "But it takes immense strength, a focus. To try and fail could drain you, leave you an empty shell." "It's better than dying in a fire," she said, her resolve hardening. "What do I do?" "Reach for it," he said simply. "Focus on the water. Call to it. The land will answer if the blood is true." Another heavy thud against the door. This time a piece of wood splintered. They were breaking through. They were out of time. Eliza closed her eyes again, shutting out the chaos. She ignored the shouts, the pounding, the fear. She found the hum of the earth again, and this time she followed the thread of the underground spring. She focused all her energy, all her anger, all her grief on that single point beneath the bonfire outside. She pulled, not with her hands, but with her mind, with her will. She pictured the water bubbling up, turning the frozen earth to mud. She poured every ounce of her being into that single thought. The hum in her head grew to a roar. The world went black at the edges of her vision. Her body trembled with the strain, and then she felt it, a deep, groaning shift in the earth beneath them. Outside, the men's triumphant shouts turned to cries of shock and alarm. There was a loud hissing sound, and the orange glow against the walls vanished, replaced by darkness and steam. The ground beneath their bonfire, saturated by the spring she had called to the surface, had collapsed, swallowing their fire and turning their camp into a pit of freezing mud. Silence. Then curses and panicked scrambling. Eliza swayed, her energy gone. Takakota caught her, his strong arm steadying her. "You did it," he whispered, his voice filled with an emotion she had never heard from him before. Awe. The men outside were in disarray. Their primary weapon, fire, was gone. The ground was treacherous. Their confidence was shattered. "This is cursed ground!" one of them shrieked. "It's the witch!" another yelled. They began to fall back, stumbling through the mud and snow, their drunken bravado replaced by superstitious terror. All except one. Silas Boone's voice cut through the chaos, filled with fury. "Cowards! It's a trick! Blackwood will have all your hides!" There was a final deafening gunshot. The bullet tore through the wooden door, splintering the plank right next to Eliza's head. She cried out, stumbling back. Then, silence. The men were gone. The siege was over. But the bullet hole was a stark reminder. They had won this battle. But Blackwood was still out there. And now he knew, without a doubt, that the girl with the snow-white hair had inherited her mother's power. He would not be scared off by mud and steam. He would be back, and next time he would bring an army. The sun rose on a scene of devastation. The collapsed, muddy pit, where the fire had been, was a smoldering scar on the white snow. The barn door was splintered, a testament to the violence of the night. Inside, exhaustion hung heavy in the air. Eliza was drained, her body aching from the effort of calling the spring. It had felt like pulling the world apart with her bare hands. Takakota had tended to her, giving her water and wrapping her in the quilt, his usual silence now laced with a new kind of reverence. He looked at her differently now, not as a lost girl he needed to protect, but as something more, something powerful. "They'll be back," Eliza said, her voice hoarse. The victory felt hollow. They had only bought themselves a little time. "I know," Takakota said. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements precise. "Boone will go back to Blackwood. He will tell him what happened. Blackwood will not see it as witchcraft. He will see it as proof. He will be more determined than ever." "Then we can't stay here," she said, a new despair creeping in. "He'll burn the whole valley to get to me." "We cannot run," Takakota stated, his voice firm. "This land is your strength. Your power is tied to it. Out in the world, you are just a girl with strange hair. Here, you are a queen in her own country." His words sent a shiver through her. A queen. For her whole life, she had been a curse, an outcast, a beggar. Could she be something more? "I don't know how to control it," she confessed. "Last night was an accident, a desperate guess." "Then I will teach you," he said. He stood up, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire barn. "Your mother was strong, but she was afraid of her gift. She tried to hide it. That was her mistake. You will not repeat it. You will embrace it. You will become the storm they fear. For the first time since she had arrived at his door, Eliza saw a fire in his eyes that wasn't born of grief or anger. It was hope. He led her outside, into the crisp morning air. He took her to the edge of the woods, to an ancient, gnarled oak tree that seemed as old as the mountains themselves. "Close your eyes," he commanded. "Feel the tree. Don't just see it with your eyes. Feel its roots, deep in the earth. Feel the life flowing beneath its bark." She did as he asked. She reached out, pressing her palm against the rough bark. She quieted her mind, searching for the hum she had felt the night before. It was easier this time. The thrum of the earth was there, a familiar song. She followed the feeling into the tree, down into its roots, up into its frozen branches. She could feel the slow, sleeping life within it, waiting for the spring. It felt peaceful. "Good." Takakota's voice was a low murmur beside her. "Now look." She opened her eyes. Standing on the other side of the clearing was Sheriff Carter Vale. He wasn't alone. He had 2 deputies with him, and their rifles were held at the ready. Eliza's heart jumped into her throat. "Takakota." "It is all right," he said calmly. "Takakota Greyhawk," the sheriff called out, his voice wary. "There was a lot of commotion out here last night. Gunshots. Silas Boone came into town this morning, raving about witchcraft and collapsed earth." "Boone and his men attacked my home," Takakota said, his voice even. "We defended ourselves." The sheriff's eyes flickered to Eliza, then back to Takakota. "Boone tells a different story. He says you're holding this girl against her will." Before Takakota could answer, Eliza stepped forward. "That's a lie," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the snow. "Silas Boone works for Alistair Blackwood. They came here to take me. Takakota saved my life." The sheriff's face was unreadable. He was a man caught in the middle. He knew Takakota was an honorable man, but he also knew the power and influence that Blackwood wielded in this valley. "Blackwood is a respected landowner," the sheriff said carefully. "Boone is his foreman. Those are serious accusations." "Ask him," Eliza challenged, her anger rising. "Ask Silas Boone why Blackwood has been searching for a girl with white hair for 20 years. Ask him what happened to my mother, Annaba, at the old Whitmore homestead." The sheriff's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the name. The fire at the Whitmore place was an old town tragedy, a dark piece of history most people preferred to forget. "That was a long time ago," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Some ghosts don't stay buried," Eliza said, her gaze unwavering. "Blackwood is coming back. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Are you going to be standing with him, Sheriff? Or are you going to stand for the law?" The challenge hung in the cold air. The deputies glanced at each other, their certainty wavering. They had come expecting to deal with a dangerous outcast. They had found a girl fighting for her life, and a story that dredged up a dark town secret. Sheriff Vale looked at Eliza, at the fire in her eyes. He looked at Takakota, standing solid as the mountain behind him, and he looked at the strange, collapsed pit of mud and steam that had once been a bonfire. He sighed, a plume of white in the frigid air. "I don't get paid enough to fight ghosts," he muttered. He lowered his rifle. "But I'll be damned if I let Alistair Blackwood run a private war in my county. I'll go talk to Boone, but you two," he said, his eyes hard, "you watch your backs. Blackwood doesn't take no for an answer." The sheriff and his men left, their departure leaving a ringing silence. Eliza looked at Takakota. They had an ally, a small one, a reluctant one, but an ally nonetheless. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "He won't be enough," Takakota said, as if reading her mind. "When Blackwood comes, the law won't stop him." "Then what will?" she asked. Takakota looked at her, then at the ancient oak tree, then at the mountains that ringed the valley. "You will," he said, The land chose your family to be its voice. Now it's time for you to learn how to shout. The next few days were a blur of training. Takakota was a patient, demanding teacher. He taught Eliza how to listen, how to focus, how to draw on the energy of the earth without letting it consume her. She learned to feel the movement of animals in the forest, to sense changes in the weather before the clouds even formed, to find the hidden weaknesses in a rock formation with just a touch. Her power grew, and with it, her confidence. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was no longer in control. She was not the shivering, desperate girl who had stumbled to this barn a few weeks ago. She was the daughter of Annaba. She was the singer of the earth's song. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Takakota did something he had never done before. He told her about himself. He spoke of his own family, a long line of guardians sworn to protect hers. He told her how, as a boy, he had played with her mother, how they had been friends before duty and fear had driven a wedge between them. He opened a small leather pouch and showed her a carved bird, identical to hers, but its wings were whole. "We each had one," he said softly, "a symbol of our bond. When she died, mine broke too." He held up his hand and she saw a faint, jagged scar across his palm. In that moment, he was no longer a silent, intimidating giant. He was a man who had lost everything, a man who had lived a lifetime with his grief and his failure. A deep, powerful emotion bloomed in Eliza's chest, an emotion she didn't dare put a name to. She reached out and placed her hand over his. "You won't fail this time," she said. "We won't." His hand turned, his fingers lacing with hers. His touch was warm and strong. The silence that fell between them was not empty. It was filled with everything they couldn't say. Their peace was shattered by the frantic ringing of the town bell. It was an alarm, a sound reserved for fire or attack. Takakota was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his rifle. They rushed to the door. In the distance, they could see the orange glow of flames. It wasn't the barn. It was the town. "Blackwood," Eliza breathed. "This is not his way," Takakota said, his eyes narrowed. "He is direct, brutal. This is chaos." Then they heard the screams and the gunshots. It wasn't an organized attack, it was a rampage. Suddenly the sheriff appeared, riding his horse hard. He reined in before the barn, his face grim. "It's Silas Boone," he yelled. Blackwood fired him, called him a coward for running. Boone got drunk and came back with a few of his cronies. "They're shooting up the town, setting fires. They've gone mad." The town that had scorned her, that had called her a curse, was now paying the price for Blackwood's evil. "They've taken hostages," the sheriff said, his voice strained. "They have them in the mercantile. Martha Consincade is one of them. The woman who had looked at her with such hate. The woman who had refused to sell her flour. Now her life was in the hands of a madman." "What does Boone want?" Takakota asked. "He wants the girl," the sheriff said, his eyes landing on Eliza. "He's screaming that she's the cause of all this. He says if we hand her over, he'll let everyone go." The town's hatred had come full circle. They had pushed her out, and now their own cruelty had come back to burn them. It was a twisted, terrible justice. Eliza looked at Takakota. She saw the conflict in his eyes. This was not their fight. The town had offered them no kindness, no help. But then she looked toward the flames, and she thought of the children, of the families who were innocent in this. She thought of Martha Consincade, a hateful woman, but a woman terrified and alone. She had the power to stop this. She was the storm. "No one is handing me over," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "We are going to end this. All of it." She looked at Takakota, her eyes blazing. "Are you with me?" A slow smile spread across his face, the first she had ever seen. It transformed him. "To the end of the world," he said. They moved through the darkness, using the chaos as cover. The town was a scene from a nightmare. Buildings burned, and panicked citizens ran through the streets. Boone and his 3 men were holed up in the mercantile, firing their guns wildly into the air. "This is a suicide mission," the sheriff said, crouching with them behind a water trough. "They're drunk and spooked. No way to reason with them." "We're not going to reason with them," Eliza said. She closed her eyes, reaching for the hum of the earth. She could feel the angry, chaotic energy of the men in the store. She could feel the terror of the hostages huddled in the back room. She focused on the building itself, the wood, the stone foundation, the heavy iron stove in the center of the room. "The stovepipe," she whispered to Takakota. "It's old, clogged with soot." He understood. A backdraft. "I can shake the building," she said, "just a little. Enough to loosen the soot, make it fall down the chimney." "And choke them out," the sheriff breathed, his eyes wide. "I need a distraction," Eliza said. "Something loud, something to make them fire their guns, use up their ammunition." Takakota nodded. He pointed to the bell tower of the church. "The bell." He vanished into the shadows, moving with a speed that was terrifying. A moment later, the huge church bell began to ring, a deep, deafening clang that echoed through the square. As predicted, Boone and his men started firing wildly at the bell tower. "Stop that ringing!" Boone screamed. While they were distracted, Eliza focused. She reached out with her mind, finding the foundations of the mercantile. She didn't pull. She pushed. Just a tremor. A slight, jarring shudder, like a heavy wagon passing too close. Inside the store, it was enough. A thick cloud of black, choking soot fell from the stovepipe, filling the room. The men began to cough, their eyes streaming. "What is this?" one of them gagged. At that moment, Takakota burst through the front windows, a terrifying whirlwind of motion. The sheriff and his deputies charged the back door. It was over in seconds. The soot-choked, disoriented men were no match for them. When the smoke cleared, Silas Boone was on the floor, Takakota's boot on his chest. The hostages were freed, stumbling out into the night air, crying and gasping. Martha Consincade was among them. She saw Eliza, and her face was a mixture of terror, confusion, and a dawning, grudging respect. But it wasn't over. A slow, deliberate clapping came from the edge of the square. A figure stepped out of the shadows. He was dressed in an expensive black coat, his face pale and aristocratic. It was Alistair Blackwood. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood at least a dozen riders, all armed with rifles. "Quite the performance," Blackwood said, his voice calm and cultured. "Truly magnificent. I must say, you are even more gifted than your mother." His eyes were fixed on Eliza, and they held a cold, possessive hunger that made her skin crawl. "This is my town, Blackwood," Sheriff Vale said, stepping forward, his pistol aimed at the man's chest. "You and your men are under arrest." Blackwood laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Your town? My dear sheriff, I own the bank that holds the deed to every building on this street. I own the land for miles in every direction. This is my town. I am the law here." His riders raised their rifles, and the sheriff and his 2 deputies were hopelessly outgunned. "It's you I want," Blackwood said, his gaze returning to Eliza. "Come with me. I will give you anything you desire. Wealth, power. We can share the secrets of this land. Refuse, and I will burn this entire town to the ground and salt the earth. I will kill every man, woman, and child, starting with him." He nodded toward Takakota. Eliza's blood ran cold. This was the choice: her freedom or the lives of everyone in the town that had hated her. She looked at Takakota. His face was grim, but his eyes told her to be strong. She looked at the townspeople, their faces filled with fear. She looked at Martha Consincade, who was staring at her, no longer with hate, but with a desperate plea. She felt the hum of the earth beneath her feet. She felt the strength of the mountains at her back. She was not a curse. She was not a prize. She was a protector. You can't have her, Takakota growled, stepping in front of Eliza. Oh, I think I can, Blackwood said with a smirk. He raised his hand, a silent command to his men. No, Eliza said, her voice clear and powerful. She stepped out from behind Takakota. He's right, this ends now. She closed her eyes and reached. Not for a trickle of water, not for a slight tremor. She reached for the mountain itself. She pulled on the raw, ancient power sleeping in the stone. The ground began to shake. Not a small shudder, but a deep, violent groan. Blackwood's smirk vanished, replaced by disbelief, then fear. His horses whinnied and reared. High above them, on the moonlit mountain face, a crack appeared in the snow. A low rumble started, growing louder and louder until it was a deafening roar. "What have you done?" Blackwood shrieked. A wall of snow, ice, and rock broke free from the mountain. An avalanche. It wasn't aimed at the town. Eliza was guiding it, shaping it, sending it down a barren ravine to the side of the settlement. But it was a terrifying display of raw, untamable power. Blackwood's men broke ranks, screaming in terror, their greed forgotten. They fled into the night. Blackwood stood frozen, his face pale in the moonlight, as the roaring river of snow passed 100 yards away, shaking the very foundations of the world. He looked at Eliza, his eyes wide with the madness of a man who had come face to face with a power far beyond his comprehension. The avalanche subsided, leaving a thunderous silence. Blackwood was broken. He fell to his knees, mumbling to himself. The sheriff, his face pale with awe, walked over and took the man's pistol without a word of protest. It was over. The town was saved. The people stared at Eliza, their fear and hatred replaced by a stunned, unbelievable gratitude. Martha Consincade walked toward her, her expression unreadable. She stopped in front of Eliza and simply said, "Thank you." Eliza looked at Takakota. He was looking at her with a pride and love so profound it needed no words. He held out his hand. She took it. They had faced the storm and won. They had found justice not in revenge, but in protection. The ghosts of the past were finally at peace. Their home was no longer a fortress, but a sanctuary. Together they turned and walked back toward the barn, leaving the whispers and the fire behind them, stepping into the quiet promise of a new dawn. What an incredible story of finding strength in the face of fear and hatred. If you were moved by Eliza's journey, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let me know in the comments what you think the townspeople will do next.